The crash came from the punishment barn just as Martha Whitfield reached the gate, and it was the kind of sound a body remembers before the mind has time to name it. Wood struck wood. Iron snapped against a post. Then came the low, torn groan of a horse that had learned fear down in its bones. Maddie stopped with her saddlebag cutting into one shoulder and the dust of Boone Ranch clinging to the hem of her dress. The road to Abilene lay open ahead of her, flat and white beneath the Kansas sun. Behind her, the men near the corral were still laughing. She should have kept walking. That was the sensible thing. She had been fired. She had been paid off. She had been told to leave before noon, and noon was coming hard across the prairie with heat enough to cook breath in a person's chest. She had no husband, no family left close enough to matter, no room promised in town, and barely enough money to keep herself fed through a week if she counted every penny twice. The horse groaned again. Maddie turned. She was 27 years old, broad through the hips and heavy in the arms, with a body men had always thought gave them permission to speak careless. They called her too big when they wanted to laugh and too soft when they wanted to dismiss her. They said she moved too slow, cared too much, and had no place on a working ranch if she could not stomach the sound of a horse being taught obedience. But there were horses on Boone Ranch that would walk through fire if Maddie Whitfield asked them quiet enough. That morning had begun like any other, though. Afterward, she would remember every small thing as if it had been arranged by some hand larger than her own. The troughs had needed filling before dawn. A bay mare had gone off her feed. A section of fence near the south pasture had leaned loose after one of the colts rubbed against it all night. Maddie had seen to all of it without being asked. Then Elias Boone sent for her. His office smelled of cigar smoke, boot leather, old paper, and the particular pride of a man who had never once wondered whether the world might be unfair because the world had mostly favored him. He let her stand before his desk while he finished writing a line in his ledger. "Whitfield," he said, at last not looking up. "You know why you're here?" "No, sir," Maddie said. "I don't." He set down his pen. "You're too soft." She had expected many things. That was not one of them, though perhaps it should have been. Boone leaned back in his chair and looked her over with the cool appraisal men often used when they mistook size for dullness and patience for surrender. "You've been warned before. Hank tells me you interfere with his methods. You calm animals he's in the middle of correcting. You make trouble where there doesn't need to be trouble. With respect, Mr. Boone," Maddie said, keeping her voice steady, "what Hank Driscoll calls correction, most decent people would call cruelty." The room went still. Boone's eyes hardened first. The rest of his face followed. He opened a drawer, took out a small envelope, and slid it across the desk with 2 fingers. "Wages owed. You're done here. Gather your things and be off my property by noon." Maddie looked at the envelope. She thought of the 3 years she had given that ranch, the winter mornings when the pump froze, the summer nights walking colicky horses beneath a moon white as bone, the frightened foals that had steadied under her hands, the fences mended before anyone noticed they were broken. "Yes, sir," she said. She did not cry. Outside, Hank Driscoll waited at the corral with his arms crossed and his hat tipped back. 4 hands stood near him, hungry for spectacle. Tommy Vale, the youngest, lingered behind them, his sunburned face uneasy. "Well, there she is," Hank called. Boone finally got tired of running a pet hospital. Maddie kept walking. "Maybe Abilene needs a woman to sing hymns to sick mules," he said. "Or maybe you can stand in a barn door and block the north wind. Woman your size ought to be good for something." The laughter came quick and mean. Maddie stopped then, not because the words had not hurt, but because she refused to let them push her faster than she chose to move. She turned just enough to look at him. "Morning, Hank." His smile thinned. "That all you got to say? That's all you're worth hearing." One of the hands coughed into his fist. Hank's face tightened, but Maddie had already turned away. Her whole life fit into one saddlebag, a spare shirt, one good dress, a winter coat she would need if she lived long enough to see October, her mother's silver comb wrapped in cloth, a tin of savings hidden beneath her cot. When she counted Boone's envelope with what she had saved, it came to a little over $30. $30 was not nothing. It was also not a future. She crossed the yard with the saddlebag on her shoulder and dust gathering around her boots. She had nearly reached the gate when the crash came. Now she stood in the punishment barn doorway, and the heat outside seemed gentle compared to what waited within. Blood, sweat, old manure, fear so sharp it had a smell of its own. The stallion was tied to the center post with 2 ropes, one around his neck and another biting cruelly into his right foreleg. He was a red roan, enormous through the chest, with a coat that might have been beautiful if it had not been dulled by dust and terror. Rope burns marked his neck raw and wet. His eyes rolled white. His nostrils flared wide enough to show the pink inside. Maddie did not step toward him. "Easy," she said. The horse jerked against the ropes and screamed. The sound went through her like a knife. "Easy," she said, again softer. "I'm not here to hurt you. Get away from him." Hank's voice came from behind her. Maddie turned. He stood 3 feet away, jaw set, eyes flat. "What did you do to him?" she asked. "What needed doing? He's bleeding. He earned it. No horse earns that." Hank came closer. "You don't work here anymore, Whitfield. That means you got no say. Boone's had enough of him. Horse won't saddle, won't ride near, took Tommy's hand clean off last week. Useless brute." The stallion had gone still now, but not calm. There was a difference. Maddie knew it the way she knew weather in her knees. This was the stillness of a creature that had spent all its strength fighting and found the world unchanged. "What happens to him?" she asked. Hank gave a short laugh. "Monroe comes Monday, the man who put animals down." Everybody in Dickinson County knew Monroe. Maddie looked back at the stallion. He was watching her, not trusting, not asking, only watching as if she were one more shape in a world that had already proven itself cruel. "What's his name?" "The boys call him Useless, the registered name." Hank spat toward the dirt. "Redemption. Some fool out of Colorado named him that." Maddie set down her saddlebag. Hank stared at her. "Don't tell me you're thinking what I think you're thinking. What would Boone take for him? You lost your mind. What would he take?" "Woman, you got no job, no barn, and no sense. That horse will kill you." Maddie did not answer. She only looked at him until he cursed under his breath and stalked toward the house. Boone named $20 with the faint amusement of a man tossing a stone into a dry well, just to hear how far it fell. Maddie paid it. The bill of sale went into her coat pocket beside her mother's comb. $20 gone. $11 and change left. No roof, no work, one condemned stallion. Getting the ropes loose took most of an hour. She spoke the whole time, not commanding, not coaxing falsely, just letting her voice become one steady thing in the dark. "My name is Martha Whitfield," she told him. "Folks call me Maddie when they're being kind and other things when they are not. I was fired this morning, so I reckon both of us have been judged and found wanting." The stallion trembled so hard the ropes quivered. She loosened the neck rope first, then the leg rope inch by inch. "They may be done with you," Maddie whispered, "but I am not." When the last rope fell, Redemption did not bolt. He stood trembling in the center of the barn, head low, sides heaving. Maddie stepped back and waited. It took a long time. Then he took one step. Only one. His muzzle touched her open palm, light as breath. "There you are," she whispered. She walked him out through the yard in front of 7 watching men. Nobody laughed this time. Hank looked as though something bitter had lodged in his throat. Tommy Vale stepped forward and held out an old halter and a stronger lead rope, in case he said. Maddie took them. "Thank you, Tommy." Redemption walked beside her through the gate, sore and shaking, but alive. The road to Abilene stretched ahead beneath the white punishing sun. Maddie had $11.40, no place to sleep, and a horse the whole county believed was already as good as dead. She adjusted the lead rope in her hand and started walking. Redemption followed at her shoulder. Abilene saw Maddie Whitfield before Maddie had any wish to be seen. She came down Main Street under a noon sun that made every window shine white and every plank porch look bleached and tired. Dust clung to the hem of her dress. Sweat had darkened the cloth between her shoulder blades. Her right hand held the lead rope Tommy Vale had given her, and at the other end of it walked the biggest red roan stallion most folks in that town had ever laid eyes on. Redemption did not walk like a killer. He walked like an animal, counting every step because the world had given him reason to suspect the ground itself. His head hung low. His right foreleg favored the road. The raw burns on his neck showed through the dust, red and wet in places, and more than one person turned away after looking at them. But most looked. Abilene was good at looking. A man outside the livery stopped with a currycomb in his hand. 2 women near the dry goods window went quiet mid-sentence. A boy carrying a sack of flour stood so still the sack began to sag against his knees. From the bat-wing doors of the Monarch Saloon, laughter spilled out and then thinned when somebody said, "That's Boone's horse." Maddie kept walking. She felt every eye. She had felt eyes on her body most of her life, measuring the width of her hips, the heaviness of her arms, the softness at her waist, judging what she could not do before she had done anything at all. This was not new. Only the horse beside her was new and the hollow place in her pocket where $20 had been. Redemption stumbled once near the end of Main Street. Maddie stopped when he stopped. She did not tug the rope. "Easy," she said. "We got nowhere to be so fast." His ear turned toward her voice, not fully, but enough. The first person she went to was Ned Calloway. Ned's general store sat on the east end of town, with flour sacks stacked by the door and a barrel of nails near the counter. Ned himself stood behind that counter, 61 years old, heavy through the middle, with a white mustache trimmed neat, and eyes that had been old even when Maddie was young. He looked up when the bell over the door rang. Then he looked past her through the front window at Redemption tied outside. His face did not change quickly. Ned had known how to keep a face still long before Maddie learned it. "Martha Whitfield," he said slowly, "is that Elias Boone's roan he was." Ned set down the pencil he had been holding. "And now he's mine." The store seemed to grow quieter around them. Somewhere in the back, a clock ticked with the fussy importance of a thing that believed time belonged to it. "I heard Boone let you go this morning." "He did." "And then you bought that horse." "Yes, sir." "How much you got left?" Maddie wanted to lie. Pride rose in her throat like a reflex, but pride had never fed a horse. $11.40. Ned took off his spectacles, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and looked out the window again. Redemption stood tied to the post, trembling lightly, though no one had touched him. "What do you need, Hay?" "Grain if I can afford it, salve for rope burns, and I need to know if there's an empty pasture or barn within walking distance that nobody will run me off before dark. That is a considerable list for $11. "Yes, sir." Ned studied her for a long moment. She stood still under it. Then he opened his ledger. "I'll put the feed and salve on credit." "Ned, don't start thanking me. I'm not in the mood for it." He dipped his pencil in ink and wrote with short, practical strokes. "There's the Harmon place out by the Smoky Hill Road. Ed Harmon died 2 winters ago. His daughter's in St. Louis and hasn't set foot here since the funeral. Barn's poor. Fence is worse. But there's pasture, and I don't know anybody eager to claim it. How far? 2 miles, maybe more." Maddie did the distance inside her head and felt the ache already waiting in her feet. "I can walk that." Ned looked at her boots, then at her face. "I expect you can." He gathered hay, a small measure of grain, and a tin of salve. Without speaking, he added an old horse blanket folded at the bottom of the sack. Maddie saw it. She did not mention it. As she turned to leave, Ned said, "Your father would have done the same fool thing." Maddie looked back. There was no mockery in his voice, only memory. "Yes, sir," she said. "He would have." The road to the Harmon homestead ran past town and out toward a dry creek bed where cottonwoods leaned with the wind, their leaves rattling like old paper. The sack of feed wore into Maddie's shoulder. The sun sat heavy over the prairie, and every mile seemed longer for the horse walking beside her. Redemption did not pull ahead. He did not lag far behind. Little by little he found her pace and kept to it. When the road dipped, Maddie stumbled on a loose stone. Redemption stopped when she did. It was such a small thing that no one else would have made much of it. Maddie made much of it. She lowered the feed sack and sat on a flat rock in the narrow shade of a cottonwood. Redemption stood several feet away, head low, ears uncertain. "You don't trust this yet," she said. He watched her. "You don't have to. Trust takes time. That is not a weakness. That is sense." His ear moved toward her voice. Maddie flexed the fingers of her rope hand. They were sore from holding herself together all day. "We are going to get through tonight first. After that, we will worry about tomorrow. That's how poor folks stay alive, Redemption. One day at a time, and sometimes one fence rail at a time." The Harmon place was worse than Ned had said, which meant it was near exactly what Maddie had feared. The farmhouse sagged at one corner, its windows gray with dust. The front step had rotted through. The barn stood behind it, weathered and tired, with a gap in the roof wide enough to let a piece of sky look in. Dry grass choked the yard. The fence had failed in 3 places Maddie could see before she even reached the gate. She stood looking at it all. Then she said, "All right." Redemption breathed beside her. The word was not hope. It was smaller than hope and more useful. It meant begin. She led him to the least broken section of pasture and walked the fence line with the rope in her hand. 4 breaks, 2 bad enough to matter before morning. She used Tommy's rope to bind the worst rails together and dragged a fallen post into place across another gap. It was ugly work. It was not proper work, but it would hold a sore, tired horse through one night. When she unclipped the lead, Redemption did not move at first. Maddie stepped back. He stood at the gate neck marked raw body, trembling as if freedom itself were another trick he had not yet learned how to survive. Then he lowered his head to the grass. Maddie sat down outside the fence so quickly her knees complained. She watched him eat, not frantically, not like an animal expecting the feed to be taken away. Slowly, steadily, as if some part of him had decided that for this one moment, nothing terrible was happening. That was when the tears came close. She swallowed them down. She did not have the strength to cry and still get through the evening. The next morning brought a woman with gray in her braid and a willow basket on her arm. Maddie was at the fence, rubbing salve along Redemption's neck while he stood stiff but still when she heard footsteps on the road. She turned to see a tall woman near the gate, small and straight-backed with a face lined by weather and eyes that missed nothing. Beside her stood a narrow-shouldered boy of 16 or so, quiet as a fence shadow. "I am Sarah Goodwin," the woman said. "This is my sister's boy, Jonas Redbird. Ned Calloway said there was a horse here who needed yarrow." Maddie looked at the basket, then at Sarah. "Ned talks too much. He talks when he is worried." Sarah's gaze moved to Redemption. "That horse has been taught hands mean pain." "Yes," Maddie said. "He has. Knowing is the door," Sarah said. "Walking through it is the work." She handed Maddie a small jar of salve. Jonas said nothing, but after a while he drifted toward the east fence and began studying the loose rails as if they were speaking a language he understood. Redemption watched them both. He did not bolt. That became the beginning of the days. Maddie found night work at the Monarch Saloon. Bess Coulter hired her to wash dishes 6 nights a week for 50 cents a night and supper before the shift. "Eat when I put food in front of you," Bess said. "Keep your mouth shut when men talk stupid unless keeping it shut costs you more than opening it." "I know how to choose my moments," Maddie said. Bess looked at her. "I expect you do." So Maddie rose, before dawn, tended Redemption, hauled water from the stubborn, well-patched fence, walked to town, worked whatever small tasks she could find, washed dishes until her hands burned, then walked back under the dark Kansas sky. The town talked. They said she was foolish. They said she was soft. They said a fat woman walking alone at night with a killer horse waiting at home was either brave or touched in the head. Hank's wife laughed in the dry goods store and said the horse had not killed her yet, but give it time. Maddie heard it. She bought flour and left. On the 9th morning, while digging near the barn wall for a usable post end, her fingers struck iron. She pulled up a bit rusted and cruel with old brown stains worked into the joints. A spade bit made for pain. Maddie sat back on her heels. For a long while she could not move. Then she carried it behind the barn and buried it deep. Redemption stood at the fence watching her when she returned. "Nobody is putting one of those in your mouth again," she said. Sarah, who had arrived without Maddie hearing, stood near the gate. "What people call wild," she said softly, "is sometimes only memory with nowhere safe to go." Later that afternoon, a man named Colt Mercer rode up on a gray gelding and offered lumber for the fence. He said Redemption had once been smart and promising before Boone bought him cheap and handed him to Hank Driscoll. "I don't need charity," Maddie told him. "I didn't offer any," Colt said. "A good fence is common sense." She let him help. When the worst rails stood firm by sundown, Colt mentioned the open class at the Prescott Fairgrounds. $100 purse. Maddie almost laughed from exhaustion. He is not ready for that. Colt looked toward Redemption, who had come to the near fence and was watching them both with dark, careful eyes. "Maybe not," Colt said, "but 6 weeks is a long time when somebody knows how to wait." That night, Maddie stood by the fence after work. Her feet blistered her shoulders, sore, her hands raw from dishwater and rope. Redemption came when she called. He didn't come fast, but he came, and he stood close enough for her to rest her hand against his face. The town could laugh. Hank could talk. Boone could count his money and call it cents. But the horse under her palm was alive. Maybe Maddie thought the world would have to see him before it stopped lying about him. The first time Maddie tried to lay the saddle pad across Redemption's back, the stallion moved sideways so fast the world went out from under her. One moment she was standing beside him in the dusty pasture with the folded pad in both hands, speaking low, feeling the morning heat already rising off the ground. The next, Redemption's whole body flashed away from her like a struck match, and Maddie's boot caught in a rut. She went down hard on her hip and elbow, the breath knocked clean out of her. For a few seconds, she lay there staring at the pale Kansas sky. Redemption stood 20 feet away, head high, eyes wide, sides heaving. He had not run to hurt her. That was the first thing Maddie made herself understand, before pain could turn into pride. He had run because some old place inside him had seen the pad and remembered what came after. She pushed herself up slowly. Her elbow burned. Dust clung to the front of her dress. Her heavy body complained in every joint as she rose, but she rose all the same. If Hank Driscoll had seen her fall, he would have laughed until he ran out of breath. If the women in town had seen it, they would have whispered that a woman built like Maddie had no business trying to gentle a horse like that. There was no one in the pasture but her and Redemption. That made the getting up cleaner. "All right," she said, picking up the saddle pad. That was one answer. "We will ask again, different." Redemption watched her as if he could not decide whether she was foolish or dangerous. Maddie didn't move toward him. She laid the pad on the fence rail where he could see it, then stepped away. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and let the silence stretch. The work went that way for days. Not forward in a straight line. Nothing living healed in a straight line. Some mornings Redemption would come close enough to smell the pad, then wheel away as if it had bitten him. Other mornings he would not come near it at all. On the 5th day he let Maddie touch it to his shoulder for the time it took a person to draw one careful breath. On the 7th, it rested across his back for 3 seconds before he stepped away, trembling. Maddie praised the 3 seconds like they were gold. Her own body became part of the learning. She knew what people saw when they looked at her too much. Woman, too much weight, too much softness gathered where they expected sharpness. But in the pasture, her size made her mindful. She did not dart or flutter. She planted her feet. She shifted her weight with care. She had learned long ago how to move through a world eager to call her clumsy, and that learning served her now. Around Redemption, nothing could be sudden. Nothing could be careless. Sarah Goodwin came most mornings with salve or herbs, or simply her quiet, which proved more useful than many people's speech. Jonas Redbird came with her and worked at the east fence without asking for permission each time. He had begun making a hackamore from soft rope, sitting on an overturned bucket near the barn, his fingers quick and sure. "No bit," he said once, not looking up. "No bit," Maddie agreed. From the pasture, Redemption watched the boy's hands. Jonas never reached for him. That was why the horse kept watching. By the 2nd week, Maddie could place the pad on Redemption's back and rest one palm against his side while he trembled beneath her touch. The trembling troubled her less than it had at first. It was not refusal anymore. It was memory passing through his body and finding no fresh pain waiting at the end. "I know," she told him, cheek near his warm neck. "Your bones are telling you this is how it starts. But listen to me. Nothing follows. Not rope, not iron, not him, just this." His breathing slowed. Not much. Enough. Hank Driscoll came on the hottest afternoon of that week. Maddie saw the dust first, then 3 riders at the gate. Hank sat in front, his arms loose, his mouth set in the shape it took when he had decided he was doing the world a favor by being cruel. 2 boon hands waited behind him, grinning like men who had come to see a show. Maddie crossed the pasture and stopped at the fence. "I hear you aim to make a fool of yourself at Prescott," Hank said. "What I aim to do is my business. Not when that half-broke killer horse gets loose around decent people." His eyes moved over her slow enough to be insulting. "You think patience and pretty talk will fix what is wrong in him? You think because he stands for you in an empty field, he will stand when the crowd starts hollering? That horse has something broke inside him." Redemption had lifted his head at Hank's voice. His body went tight, but he didn't run. Maddie felt anger move through her, hot and useful. She kept it clean. "A thing is not dangerous just because it remembers who hurt it." Hank's face changed. "Not much, just enough. That's so." "That is so. You will regret this. If I do?" Maddie said, "It will be mine to carry." Hank looked past her at Redemption, and for a moment Maddie saw something sharper than contempt in him. Fear maybe, though not of the horse. Fear of being proved wrong by something he had tried to destroy. He turned his horse hard and rode off. Only after the dust settled did Maddie realize her hands were shaking. That night she lay in the barn, listening to Redemption breathe beyond the open door, and asked herself every question Hank had meant to plant in her. Was she asking too much? Was Prescott a chance or a cruelty of another kind? Was she doing this for Redemption's truth, or for her own need to make the town swallow its laughter? The questions stayed with her until dawn. Then dawn came wrong. No birds, no wind, no ordinary rustle from the grass. Maddie opened her eyes to a silence so complete it felt like a hand over the mouth of the world. She rose and stepped outside. The air pressed thick against her skin. Southwest, the sky had turned a greenish yellow that made her remember childhood storms and her father's voice telling her to get inside before the prairie showed its teeth. Redemption stood at the far end of the pasture, head high, nostrils wide. He knew. "Come on," Maddie called, taking the lead rope. "Come to me." He did not. She went to him slow at first, then faster, when the first low growl of thunder rolled across the land. His hooves stamped, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Every line of him said, "Run." "I see it," she said. "I know. I'm here." Getting the lead on him took all the steadiness she owned. Getting him to the barn took more. He came in hard, each step a decision against instinct. At the door, he stopped dead. Maddie stepped in front of him and laid one hand flat against his chest. "Trust me one more time." The wind hit, then sudden and full of grit. Redemption entered the barn. She did not tie him. She would not bring him into fear and fasten him there. She kept the lead loose and stood beside him as rain struck the roof like thrown gravel. Lightning cracked so close the flash and sound arrived together. Redemption surged back, nearly rising. Maddie moved clear of his hooves and sharpened her voice just enough to reach him. "Look at me." His eyes found her. "There I am," she said. "Right here." The barn groaned. Water came through the roof in silver sheets. Somewhere outside, wood split with a sound like a rifle shot. Maddie pressed her hand to Redemption's neck and felt the terrible shaking of him, and beneath it, the effort he was making to stay. The storm passed in less than an hour and left ruin behind. The cottonwood had come down over the east fence. The well housing leaned broken. 3 posts were twisted from the ground. The pasture stood open wide enough for any horse to leave. Redemption stood in the barn doorway, breathing hard but calm. Maddie looked at him and felt something settle in her chest. Trust had held. Jonas arrived first, soaked to the skin, carrying an axe too large for him. Sarah came behind with cloth and coffee. Colt Mercer's wagon appeared through the mud soon after, loaded with lumber, before Maddie had even known how much she needed it. None of them made speeches. They worked. By late afternoon, the fence was patched enough to hold. Jonas's hands were blistered. Colt's shirt was dark with sweat. Sarah cleaned a cut on Maddie's forearm and said, "The wind tells the truth of weak places." Maddie looked at the repaired fence. Then it told plenty. At the Monarch that night, Bess Coulter pulled her aside before the dishwater could take the skin off her hands. "Hank's been talking to Archie Jensen," Bess said. "Says that horse should be barred from Prescott. Dangerous animal. Bad history. He's bringing men to swear to it. There's also talk that Boone's ownership papers were never properly filed, which means your bill of sale may be questioned." Maddie stood very still. When does Jensen decide? Soon. Maddie left for Prescott before sunrise with the bill of sale in her coat pocket. Sarah went with her, not speaking much. Jonas waited outside Jensen's office with the wagon holding the reins like a boy trying to look older than he was. Inside, Hank stood against the wall wearing satisfaction like a clean shirt. Jensen sat behind his desk with county papers spread before him. Maddie read every line. Her mouth had gone dry, but her voice did not. "The Garrett registration predates the County Act," she said. "Transfer by possession and bill of sale was sufficient under territorial practice. Boone had legal title. My bill of sale stands." Jensen looked at the papers for a long time. Then he said, "Your entry stands." Hank pushed off the wall, red-faced and empty-handed. Maddie walked out into the sun. That evening, back at the homestead, Redemption came to the fence when she called. Jonas hung the finished hackamore on a nail near the gate. Sarah left a small pouch of cedar and prairie sage in Maddie's palm. "For breathing," she said. Colt brought coffee and stood beside the fence without asking whether she was afraid. Maddie looked north toward Prescott. The sky had cleared, washed clean by storm, and the road lay waiting in the last gold of day. She touched Redemption's face. "We are not perfect," she whispered, "but we are ready enough." Redemption was waiting at the gate before the sun came up. Maddie saw him when she stepped out of the barn, with Jonas Redbird's soft hackamore in her hands, and Sarah Goodwin's little pouch of cedar and prairie sage tucked into her coat pocket. The eastern sky had only begun to pale, and the prairie still held the last blue shadow of night, but the red roan stood at the fence as if he had been there a long while, head level, ears forward, dark eyes fixed on her. He knew. Maddie had stopped pretending horses did not know things, simply because people lacked the language to explain how. Redemption had known storms before clouds declared them. He had known cruelty in men before their hands moved. He had known somehow that this morning was not like the others. "All right," she said softly. "I'm awake." She dressed without hurry. Her good dress was not fine, but it was clean. She braided her hair tight and pinned it back. She washed her face in cold water from the stubborn well and stood for a moment with both hands braced against the bucket rim, letting the chill settle her. Her body ached from weeks of work, fence posts, dishwater, long walks, hard falls, bad sleep. Her hips were sore, her shoulders were thick with tiredness, her hands were rougher than they had been the morning Boone fired her, though she would not have believed that possible then. But when she walked to the gate, Redemption lowered his head to meet her, and the ache in her became something she could carry. Jonas came just after first light, with a borrowed wagon, quiet as always, his hair still damp from washing, and his face solemn with the importance of the day. Sarah sat beside him, wrapped in a dark shawl, though the morning would soon turn hot. She nodded at Maddie once. No blessing, no fuss, just presence. They took the north road toward Prescott, with Redemption walking at Maddie's shoulder. The 4 miles passed beneath a sky that lightened by degrees. Grasshoppers clicked in the ditches. Meadowlarks called from fence wire. The air was cool for a little while, and Maddie was grateful for it, knowing Kansas would take that kindness back by noon. Colt Mercer waited near the east gate of the fairgrounds with 2 cups of coffee and his gray gelding tied loose behind him. He handed Maddie 1 cup. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He looked at Redemption not with surprise, but with that honest, measuring look of his. He traveled well, like he knew where he was going. Colt's eyes moved to hers. Maybe he did. The fairgrounds were already waking. Wagons rolled through the gates. Horses called from holding pens. Men shouted over harness creak and wheel noise. Somewhere a hammer struck a stake again and again. Children ran where they had been told not to run. Flags snapped in a rising wind. The smell of hay dust, sweat, fried dough, and fresh manure gathered into one thick public smell. Redemption's head lifted. Maddie felt the change run through the lead rope before she saw it in his body. His ears moved constantly, catching every sound. His nostrils widened. Not panic, not yet, but awareness sharpened to a blade. "Walk the outside first," Colt said. "I know." He almost smiled. "I figured you did." They walked the perimeter. Once, twice, 3 times. Maddie on Redemption's left, Colt and the gray gelding on his right, Jonas following at a distance with the wagon. Sarah watching everything and everyone. Redemption startled when a child dropped a tin cup near the fence. He danced sideways when a gun cracked from some target contest across the grounds. Both times Maddie turned toward him, put her hand at the base of his mane, and called him back with her voice. "Here I am," she said. "Just me." And each time he came back. That was what mattered. Not that fear had vanished. Fear did not vanish because a body had been loved for 5 weeks. Fear returned. The miracle was that now it had somewhere to return from. By mid-morning, Ned Calloway arrived with his wife Mabel, walking slower than she would have liked, but looking determined enough to shame the road itself. Bess Coulter came not long after with biscuits wrapped in a cloth. "Eat," Bess said. "I'm not hungry. That has never been a sensible argument." Maddie ate. Mabel Calloway stood near the rail and studied Redemption. "He is larger than I imagined." "Yes, ma'am, and calmer than I was told." Maddie glanced toward the holding area where men from Boone Ranch had begun to gather. "Folks tell what suits them." Mabel's mouth tightened. Not all folks. That was as close to tenderness as some people came, and Maddie knew enough to accept it. Tommy Vale found her just before noon. His hat was in his hands, and his face carried the same misery it had carried the day he brought warning about Hank's papers. "Miss Whitfield," he said, breathless. "Hank's here. He's been talking again, but Jensen ain't listening now, so I think he means to try something else." Maddie looked across the fairgrounds and saw Hank near the ring gate, arms loose at his sides, face too calm. "Thank you, Tommy." He looked at Redemption. "He looks good." "He is good," Tommy swallowed and nodded as if that answer had struck him somewhere private. At 5 minutes before the open class, the holding area tightened with movement. Riders gathered, horses stamped, dust rose in soft clouds around hooves. Maddie fitted the hackamore with careful fingers. Jonas's ropework lay gentle across Redemption's nose, firm enough to guide, soft enough not to punish. Redemption breathed against her sleeve. "We have done harder things than this," she whispered. Then Hank moved. He came from the side with a heavy crop in his hand, walking as if he had every right to be there. Too close to Redemption's flank, too casual. A stumble could be called accident. A frightened horse could be blamed for what followed. Jonas saw it first. The boy stepped forward sharply, eyes fixed on Colt. Colt moved without raising his voice, placing himself between Hank and the stallion. "Don't," Colt said. Hank stopped. The word had been quiet, but quiet did not mean soft. People nearby turned. Sarah stood beside the rail, her lined face still. "A man who needs a frightened horse to prove him right," she said, "has already lost." The sentence carried farther than she had raised it. Hank's jaw worked. For one moment Maddie thought he might swing the crop anyway. Then he saw the eyes on him. He stepped back. Maddie gave him no more than a glance. That was all he had earned. She led Redemption through the gate. The crowd did not go silent at once. It changed first. That was stranger. Conversation thinned in sections. Men who had been laughing turned their heads. Women leaned forward beneath parasols. Somewhere a child asked too loudly if that was the killer horse. Then Maddie stood in the center of the ring beside the red roan stallion and felt the full weight of Abilene and Prescott and Boone Ranch and every cruel certainty pressing toward her. She was aware of her body in that moment, of course. She had always been made aware of it. Her wide hips, her heavy arms, her round face damp with heat. She knew some had come hoping to see the fat girl fail grandly and fall hard. She knew some had already shaped the story in their minds. Then she put one hand on Redemption's neck and mounted him. No saddle, no bit, only the soft hackamore, her breath, his trust, and all the mornings that had brought them here. Redemption stood. The ring went quiet. Maddie let him feel her stillness. She did not rush to prove anything. She let the people look at the horse they had called useless and the woman they had called too soft. She let them see the space between rumor and truth. Then she shifted her weight. Redemption moved, not fast, not flashy, better than that. He walked forward with a controlled, listening grace. She turned him with the smallest pressure of her leg and the change of her breath. He followed. She asked him to stop, and he stopped as if the thought had been his own. She circled him near the far rail, then crossed the ring at a measured pace, his ears moving between her and the crowd, his body alert but not afraid enough to flee. There were better trained horses there, more polished, more expensive, horses with saddles shined and bridles silvered. But none moved like Redemption moved because none had been asked for trust in quite the same way. Maddie felt the conversation between them as clearly as speech. Here. Yes. Wait. I am with you. At the rail, she passed Elias Boone. He stood with one hand on the fence, his face unreadable except for the eyes. The eyes had changed. They were the eyes of a man watching his own judgment come undone. Hank stood several feet away, stiff with fury. Maddie didn't stop. She did not raise her voice. As Redemption passed them, she looked toward both men and said the words plainly. He was never useless. You only saw him after the world had hurt him. Boone looked away first. Redemption completed the final turn and came to rest in the center of the ring. Maddie sat deep and quiet, his head lowered to its natural place. His breathing was steady beneath her. For one stretched moment, no one made a sound. Then the applause came. It rose unevenly at first, then gathered until it struck the ring like weather. Maddie's heart lurched, not for herself but for Redemption. She slid down slowly and placed both hands on his neck. "Still me," she whispered, "same as before." He did not spook. He turned his head, looked toward the stands, then touched his nose to her shoulder. The sound grew. Archie Jensen met her at the gate with his clipboard and a face that looked as if it had been rearranged around a new understanding. "First place," he said. Maddie accepted the ribbon and the purse because both mattered. $100 meant feed, lumber, roof, shingles, nails, winter. But as she led Redemption away from the ring, she knew the money was not the only thing placed into her hands that day. A future had weight too. Colt found her near the wagon after the crowd thinned. Bess had tears in her eyes and denied them. Ned kept clearing his throat. Jonas stood beside Redemption like he had personally helped hold the sky up. And perhaps he had. On the road home, Colt drove while Maddie sat beside him with the prize money folded in her coat pocket. Redemption walked behind the wagon, calm and tired, his hooves steady on the road. "I am going to buy the Harmon place," Maddie said. Colt did not look surprised. "Figured you might. Not just for me. For horses like him, one's folks call ruined before they ask what happened." Behind them, Redemption's steps kept time. Sarah, riding in the wagon bed beside Jonas, said, "Land that has heard pain can learn a different sound." Maddie looked out over the evening prairie gold light touching the grass. Within weeks, a letter would go to Margaret Harmon in St. Louis. Ned would help with the figures. Bess would lend her kitchen table. Sarah would help her choose words that were honest and not pleading. The answer, when it came, would say yes. Tommy Vale would walk 4 miles to ask if he could learn her way with horses. Hank Driscoll would come once hat in hand carrying an apology too rough to be clean and too late to erase anything but real enough to leave standing. Maddie would not forgive cheaply. and she would not hate forever. On the first day of October, Jonas and Tommy raised the cedar sign at the gate while Ned, Bess, Sarah, Colt, and Mabel watched from the road Second Chance Ranch. M. Whitfield, proprietor. Redemption stood at the fence with a bay mare beside him, autumn light warm across his red coat. Maddie placed her palm against his face. "Look what we did," she said. His breath warmed her hand. They had called her too soft, too large, too foolish, too much. They had called him useless, dangerous, broken, not worth the feed it took to keep him breathing. None of those names held now. The wind moved over the Kansas grass and touched the carved letters on the sign, and Maddie Whitfield stood beneath them with solid ground under her feet, a horse under her hand, and a future opening wide as the prairie.